Hi, everyone. This is Caron Whitaker with the League of American Bicyclists. Thanks for joining me tonight for our webinar on preparing to lobby for the National Bike Summit. I first want to make sure that everyone can see the screen and hear my voice. So on the right side of your screen, there should be the GoToWebinar control panel with a question box. If you can hear me and see the screen, maybe see it switch. I'll try switching a couple, and I'll know if it's working. So there you go. All right, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Preston. All right. Always want to make sure before I start going. Okay. So what I'd like to talk about tonight is talk a little bit about what the Summit Lobby Day is and how to prepare for it, how you can do a little research and preparation on your member of Congress and your senator, and also on biking in your community. Now, there is a handout attached, which you should be able to see again in that control panel. If not, I will send it along with the email tomorrow. So we'll also talk about what to expect in your meetings on the Hill and what's going to happen in the summit, again, to prep for the meetings. And finally, what follow-up can look like. And I always push for good follow-up. It helps me do my job. But this year, we're also trying to beta test a new bicycle-friendly legislator rating. So it's going to be really important this year. And then we'll end with some Q&A, but you should also feel free to put in some questions now as I go along. Okay. So, and then next week, of course, we'll have the webinar on the specific legislative asks that you'll be making in your meeting. I already sent out one email with a preview of some of those asks, and next Monday we'll go through some more. So one of the things about the National Bike Summit is we're always in Washington. It's not one of those conferences that gets to move around, and we do that specifically so that we can have this lobby day. And it's important for us to do this lobby day because we know it's one of the most effective things you can do. The Congressional Management Foundation is a group here in Washington. They're sort of like a think tank about how congressional offices can be their most effective. They also study how those offices work and how the staffers gauge what is successful. And they ask this question every time they do their survey. They say, if your member or senator has not already arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might the following advocacy strategies have to his or her decision? The top one is always an in-person visit in Washington. 97% say it's has a lot of influence or some influence. And so that's why we do this every year. Last year, we had 3 summit asks, and we got all of those incorporated into the Senate version of a transportation bill. So what we did last year on the Senate side, we need to do this year on the House. So there's 2 bills we're going to be lobbying on in general. The transportation bill, which runs out in September. In the Senate, it takes 4 committees to write that bill. The bill that writes the road part is already done, and we'll talk about that next week. The House Transportation Committee says they're going to release their bill in April. So the summit is really, this is the last chance to try to get our things in there. And then the other thing that Congress is working on this year is to set a regulatory framework for automated vehicles. And we are really working hard to make sure that what comes out of that has some considerations for bicycling and walking. Okay, so I do have one question about the Senate is on recess when you're here. That is true. Actually, both the House and Senate will be on recess, but the staffers will be here, the transportation staffers will be here. So it may actually result in you having some more relaxed longer meetings. Okay. So what is Lobby Day? I see we have some questions. I'll get back to those in a minute. Okay. So the Summit lobby meetings, what this is your opportunity for you to meet with your elected officials, well, or staff, and advocate for biking. So this year it will be staff. I'll talk about that in a moment. When you get to the Summit, the meetings will be set up for you. In most cases, they're being set up by a state coordinator, someone from your state who's been reaching out to the offices. You'll get your schedule and meet with others from your state on Monday. And for each meeting you go to, there will be a folder already set up with the handouts and talking points about the bills. And next week, we'll talk about what those specific asks are. So we always get this question, when will you know about your schedule? And how will you know? There will be an app for that. It's called Advocacy Day. And that will include where your meetings are. It will include electronic copies of the handouts. It will have a little bit of information on the members of Congress. It'll have who else is in your meeting. Your schedule will probably not come online until the Summit. We wait for that because lots of times meetings get set up in the last week, and we know that if folks have access to the app before that, they get really concerned if a meeting isn't set up. So we wait until you get here. If for some reason you have a meeting that still needs to be set up, we'll have people on site to help with that. So who will you meet with? This year, you're going to be meeting with the transportation staffer. In general, at the Senate meetings, there will be a few to several people with you. So everyone from your state who's lobbying will all go to those Senate meetings together, which is why it's important to be really organized before you get there. When you go to the House of Representatives, your representative meeting is generally a much smaller group. And if for some reason you are the only person from your district and you're nervous about that, we will find someone to go with you, maybe even a league staff person. We'll still ask you to do the talking, but there'll be someone there for moral support. I know sometimes folks are disappointed that the members won't be here, and I get that. It's nice to take a picture, meet them in person. But when it comes to actually writing legislation, the staff are key. The staffers understand the issues and the details much better than the members. Remember, the members have to vote on every single issue in front of Congress. Those staffers might have 3 or 4 issue areas, so they can dive a lot more deeply. And the members of Congress really rely on staff. If you've ever been to a summit before, you know when the members there's always a staff person with them to make sure, they've got the details right, to get the information. Like I said, last year, we got all of our asks into the bill. Most of those meetings were with staff members. So the staff really matters. So once you get there, what happens in the meeting? Well, generally there'll be introductions. They'll tell a story about why biking is important for your community. It's good to ask that staffer, hey, are you from the district? Are you from the state? Do you bike? You might learn something about them that's going to help make that case. Then you'll make that policy ask. You'll ask them to co-sponsor a bill. And then before you leave, I think it's really important to say, when can I get back in touch with you? The staffer most likely will say, I need to talk to my boss about that issue. You'll say, great, when are you going to talk to her? And when should I follow up with you? Okay, so before we get to the preparation part, I'm going to see if we can take some questions. All right, so we have one question from North Carolina saying they have a lot of turnover and they have 6 meetings planned. I think, Terry, I'm going to talk to you after this because I'm a little bit confused by your question about the number of districts and candidates. Okay. Let's see what else. So I got a suggestion, a reminder for folks to ask to meet with their member of Congress when they're in the district. Okay, yeah, thanks, Galen. So when you come to Washington, it's great to meet with their congressional staff. Their transportation staffer is often the person who's in the details on the issues. But when you are at home and when they come home for their district recess, that is a great time to meet with a member. They're usually more relaxed. Their staff is trying to find meetings for them, so you're helping out the staff, and you can get them out to see things. But it's a great point, and it's a great thing to do is try to meet with them when they're in the district, and show them, you can show them there how bicycling is important in your district or how walking is important in your district. Okay. So preparing for your meeting before you come. Again, going back to the Congressional Management Foundation, when they're asked, again, this is a question to, these are senior staffers and communication staffers. That's how helpful is it for messages from constituents to include the following. And information about the impacts of the bill on the district and state are the most important. The constituents' reason for supporting it, also very high up, as well as personal stories. So what we're going to give you as the league is sort of the technical information of what's in the bill, why we think it's good for biking. Next week, I'll give you some talking points that we think can be used in most offices. But if you can take the time and think through who your member of Congress is, who your senators are, and what's happening with biking in your community, that will make your visit just that much more successful. So one of the things I did this year, I added a cheat sheet. It's in the handouts, part of the GoToWebinar. If you can't find it, don't worry. I will send it out tomorrow when we send out the recording of this webinar. So in the cheat sheet, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in there, but it's basically just something that should take you 20 to 30 minutes. Figure out who your member of Congress is and your senators if you don't know. Find out what committees they're on, what caucuses they're on, and then think through how that can help you when you're trying to promote biking and walking to them. So whether it's bicycle infrastructure or whether it's biking safety, how can you talk to them? How can you find something that they're interested in? First step is, of course, is to find your district. All of these websites will be in that handout, but it takes you to this page. You put in your zip code, it will tell you who your member of Congress is. Every member of Congress has a website. In the House, it's usually their last name, .house.gov. In the Senate, it's their last name, .senate.gov. When you're here, you can look here for legislative issues. That will generally tell you where their committee is, what committees they're on, where they stand on transportation. You might have to Google caucuses, or not Google caucuses, but search for it on their website. And then it's also just to take a quick look at their media center. What are they talking about? Is there anything there related to transportation or infrastructure? In terms of what committees work on transportation, in the House, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, obviously. Energy and Commerce does automated vehicles, and Ways and Means has to find the funding for the transportation bill. So those three bills, those three committees have a natural pull to what we're talking about. In the Senate, it's the Environment and Public Works, the Commerce Committee, Banking and Finance all work on transportation. Their Commerce Committee also works on automated vehicles. So if your member is on one of those committees, then these bills, they may already know about these bills. They're already up on the issues. If your member is not on one of those committees, then you need to think through sort of what about biking relates to their expertise? Because most members are experts on the issues of their committee. So if it's a health committee, that seems, you should be able to connect that. If it's small business, you can talk about what it can mean for downtown economic development to do biking and walking. You can talk about bike shops. So if you think through that before you get here, it'll be a little bit easier once you're here. Now, in the House in particular, there's a bunch of caucuses. And these are more, if the committee is like their expertise and where they're doing their work, the caucus is more something that they're interested in. They don't always have an official role. Some caucuses are more involved than others. There's 3 caucuses in particular that I think are worth noting. One is the Congressional Bike Caucus, led by Earl Blumenauer and now Ayanna Pressley and Representative Buchanan from Florida. And this picture on top is an event we do at the Bike Caucus every year before Bike to Work Day, where we tell congressional staffers, bring your bikes down, and we'll have some mechanics do some free tune-ups, little tune-ups for you, just to get them out and excited about biking. We also do a lot of briefings for them. There's a new caucus called the Future of Transportation that is focused on equity and sustainability in transportation. The 3 caucus co-chairs are there. Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. Chuy Garcia is at the podium. He's from Illinois. And Mark Takano from California on the other side of him. So they're talking about those big issues of transportation. I just want to point to the other member of Congress on the left. That's Earl Blumenauer, Mr. Bicycle in Congress. He's supporting the Future of Transportation caucus, but this caucus is mostly, they have 3 different co-chairs, people of color. They really wanted to bring in equity issues, so he is being supportive of them. And then there's a fitness caucus. Again, if you want to talk about health issues, that's another place to look. If you want to do a little bit of extra research, one idea is to go to votesmart.org. You can look up to see if your member of Congress or your senators have said anything about transportation and infrastructure. There's also ratings by different interest groups. So there is a rating for transportation. It's mostly done by groups that care about funding transportation. But you can look at some of the League of Conservation Voters, see what they care about. The other thing is look at your local newspaper, do a quick Google search on what your member of Congress has been in the paper for recently. Get a sense of what their top issue is so that you can relate to the staff. One thing we'll ask for you as a group to do when you get to the summit is find what your angle is when you go into the meeting. Did they vote with us? Did they co-sponsor a bicycle-friendly bill? And I will get you that information. Is there something they said in the speech? Is there something you saw in the media coverage that you want to thank them for? And then again, that question of what relates to biking, is it climate? Is it health? Is it equity? Is it local business and the local economy? Is there an example there that you can talk about, an issue there? Do they care about youth? Is there a bike co-op or a build a bike program that you can talk to them about? And you don't need everybody on your team to have a story that's going to make that connection. You just need one. But again, thinking through that before you get there will be really helpful. The other thing that's helpful is to think about that local case. Remember what the staffer said is if you can say, how is this going to affect things in my district? So if there's an existing project that's going on, that there's positive media, quotes from a mayor or a local business, you talk about the safety benefits. If there's been a crash recently or, God forbid, a fatality, talking about that and how safety funding could maybe help with that. If there's a proposed project that's in a plan that you can talk about, what's valuable about that, what the benefits are, that's really important. A lot of you are already working for or with your local or state bike walk organization. If you're not, make sure you check out their website before you come and see what they're doing in your area. You might find some great stuff. If you're not sure who your local or state bike organization is. If you go to bikeleague.org, and on the bottom of the table of contents there's that connect locally. If you put in your city and state, or I think even your zip code, it will show, you know, the organizations in the area, the bike clubs in the area, things like that. If you want to do even more extra credit, this website on the bottom will show transportation alternatives projects that have been funded in your state in the last couple of years. And maybe that's a project that you can talk about when you get into the office. One of the things I do, I have my Google News set for a search for transportation alternatives, and these are just some of the headlines that have come up in the last week. New Orleans, Bowling Green in Kentucky, New York. I'm not sure where the Pine Street is, but somewhere on Pine Street, all talking about transportation alternatives. So if you do a little searching, you should be able to find something in your area that you can point to and say, hey, this is what this program funds and this is why it's important. The other thing that will be on your packet, that will be in the packet when you get to the meetings and is on the website if you want to look at it, is Bicycle Friendly America Awards. Are you a bicycle friendly community? Are there businesses in the area? Is there a story there that you can talk about that you think would relate to the member of Congress? All right, and talk a little bit about what's going to happen at the summit, but please do feel free to put in any more questions. So Elliot has a question. I'm going to get to your question in a minute, Elliot. So let me get back. Oops, sorry, just jumped ahead. So preparing for your meeting at the summit. Sunday morning, we'll go through the asks. I'll do it next week on the webinar. I'll do it again on Sunday morning. I really suggest going to both, especially if you have any questions, just to make sure you feel very comfortable with the asks. Monday afternoon at the summit, we'll have a how to lobby session. Last year I had a number of lobbyists join me and we did some Q&A for the audience. People found that really helpful. So this year I'm going to do it again with a couple of lobbyists, and we're going to add some congressional staff so that you can ask them direct questions about, hey, is it helpful when I do this? Is it not helpful when I do that? So I think that will be interesting. And then after that, you'll break up and sit with your state delegation meeting and strategize there on how what you're gonna do in your meetings. If you have any questions throughout the summit, look for me, look for Ken McLeod. We can help you with that. Most states have a state coordinator. That's the person, it's generally someone at your state advocacy group. They're the ones setting up the meetings. They'll have your schedules. They'll have the information packets, and they can be the local connectors to the other folks in your state. Most of these folks have been doing it for a while. They're really good. They know their stuff. So you can check in with them. If you don't have a state coordinator, the league staff will help. We might try to match you up with another state, or, you know, we'll be there to make sure you understand what's in your packet, answer any questions. When you get into those groups, we're going to ask a couple things to do. We want you to talk there and agree on, again, that story, that angle for bicycling and walking. Maybe practice how each person is going to introduce themselves. You can introduce yourself to the group. We're really looking for just 1 or 2 sentences on who you are and why you care. And then think about, like, okay, where are we going to meet before this meeting? Who's coming to that meeting? Get all those logistics down. I always suggest that's important, even if it feels like overkill. This is something I do with other lobbyists when we go to a lobby day. Decide who's going to lead the meeting, assign who's going to make each of the asks. You know, I always suggest making sure someone decides to be the note taker. Lots of times during that conversation, you might forget the details while you're there. If there's someone there writing it down, that's really helpful. Make sure you know who's going to have the packet. And who's going to follow up, both with the staffer that you meet with and with me at the league, so I know what happened and can follow up. So what to expect on the Hill? Lobby meetings are generally 15 to 30 minutes. Because the members aren't in town, you might get closer to the 30 minutes this time. Sometimes they'll have so many people coming to meet, this is considered fly-in season in Washington, that they'll say, let's meet in the hallway. Don't worry about it. It's not an insult. That's just what they have to do. They're tiny offices. You're going to have a little small talk. You might get asked some questions you can't answer. That's okay. You might get an answer that you're like, oh, what does that even tell me? And that's what we're going to focus on. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. That happens. It doesn't mean it's an unsuccessful meeting. It's just staffers can't always answer for their boss. And then you'll make a policy ask. So this is going to be one of the asks, HR 3040, the Safe Streets Act for safety money. Most of the asks this year will be to co-sponsor a bill. We do have one ask on automated vehicles that there's not a bill addressed to. So I'm just giving you a heads up now. I've sent some information out about this. Just get yourself comfortable with this, because what we're going to be asking for is for them to support a vision test and to talk to other members of Congress about needing a vision test. We'll have more information about that coming up. One thing I ask is that you really try to keep these meetings to the summit asks. We're going to have 3 asks in the House. We're going to have 3 asks in the Senate. At least one of them overlaps. That's a lot to cover in 30 minutes. And so I don't want you to dilute the message. If you have too many things that you're asking for, then the staffer feels like, they're never going to be able to satisfy you, right? They really want to know priorities. So keeping to those 3 asks. If you have a member of Congress who's been supportive of 2 of them and you want to add one, that's something we can talk about. But before you do that, you have to make sure that you talk about it on Monday afternoon in your group and you get agreement from everyone. Most of the times after the Hill Day, we go to the reception, everyone's really psyched about their meetings. The one complaint I sometimes hear is, oh, someone in my group went off on something else. So just be careful about that. Elliot asked specifically on a bill, the Rec Trails bill. And one of our concerns, Elliot, his question is, does it supplement transportation alternatives or will it take away from transportation alternatives? We don't know. And we have some concerns with that. And I can talk about that more offline or once we get to the issues, Bill, but I will follow up with you on that as well. All right, I see I have a couple more questions. So yes, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for review after that. You will be also got a question about, will we be introduced to the state coordinators at the summit? You will be introduced prior to the summit, or you will be introduced at the summit. If you want to be introduced prior to the summit, I think we can introduce you via email. Okay. So just to get back, just some tactics in terms of lobbying. I always use these 3 Ps. This is how I was taught. Be polite, be prepared, be persistent. Some of the biggest pitfalls we see in the meeting is that the discussion veers off topic. Sometimes if a staffer knows they're going to have to say no to you, they may want to never get to that ask. So they may talk about biking in the area. They may, they'll definitely be friendly. They're friendly people, but they might get off topic. And so you need to really make sure you can bring it back to biking. You know, one thing you can say is, we really appreciate your time and we want to make sure we get to discuss why we are here. You know, be supportive of their biking experience is something I have on there. We had one meeting that where a staffer said, oh, I was just biking the other day, and someone started asking her about was she wearing a helmet, and the meeting completely went off track to why you should be wearing a helmet and not about the issue. So, you know, try to really stay focused on the ask, talk a little bit about biking and of course how biking helps your district, but make sure you get to those asks. Another pitfall, of course, is you don't get to make the ask. So be prepared. Short introductions is the other piece. That's one of the things I suggest you practice on Monday, so you don't spend the whole time introducing yourself. Make sure someone is ready to take that initiative and make the ask. Sometimes you'll make the case, but you leave not getting an answer. A couple of things to do on that: be prepared to listen. Make sure, I always like to say, assign someone to take notes. Make sure someone makes the ask, and if they don't answer it the first time, ask the second time. I will say staffers will often say, I really need to check in with the representative. That's fine. If they say that, say, great, when can I check back with you? A couple of questions I get. If you ask a question you can't answer, that is fine. Just tell them, I don't know, but I'll get back to you on that. It's much more important that you say that than you guess at an answer. Because if you get it wrong, then they may not come back to you for other information, things like that. They also don't expect you to have the answer to everything, but I can help you with that afterwards. If you get a question you don't know, you can check in with me, you can check in with Ken, we will get you an answer so you can get back to that member. If you feel like they're just going through the motions and they're not really listening, then try to ask them some specific questions, like, will you check in with the representative and let me know? Great, then when should I follow up with you? In the very, very rare case, I feel like I've been doing this webinar every year for several years. I always talk about what to do if you get frustrated. I can't think of one time when this has really happened. But if it does, you do want to make sure that you can show that you're listening, slow down the conversation, repeat what they said, then say why you disagree, give an answer. If you can't get out of it, if you feel like you get into that cycle where you're just going back and forth and disagreeing, you can make the point, we can agree to disagree. However, this issue is important to me. I came all the way to Washington and I want to express that to my elected officials. If you say that, the staffer will take note because they know that that means you're serious. If you have any of these concerns, address it in your follow-up email, let Ken or myself know. Consider writing a blog or a newsletter or a letter to the editor and then send it to the office. I've seen that be incredibly successful multiple times. And just whenever you're doing it, just remember, be polite, prepared, and persistent. Sometimes you will have to follow up with an office 2 or 3 times. It might take a month and a half to get an answer. But if you keep on them, then they will have to deal with that issue. They'll have to take that issue to the boss. What staffers tell me is that when they have a constituent come and they ask a question and they know their boss is not going to be in line, you know, they'll say, oh, well, I'm not really sure where he is. I'll check in. You know, just give me a call back in a week. Give me an email in a week. And 9 out of 10 folks won't do it. And so then that staffer never has to get a no from his boss for you. You have to stay on them and be like, hey, have you talked to your boss about this? Where is he on this issue? And just keep pushing. If you keep pushing, they will eventually, 1, get you an answer, and 2, realize that you're a force that they're going to have to reckon with, that they need to answer your emails because you're going to keep coming back. I often get the question, I know people get frustrated sometimes because their member just never votes the right way on our issues. And I know that can be really tough, but it's still important to go to these meetings, and it's still important to follow up, because that's how they know that there are constituents that care about this, and that their no vote or their vote against us, it's not a free vote. There are people in their district that care and don't like it. So if you can find common ground, find common ground. 2, stay in touch with the staffer. 3, invite them to local events. And for staffers, they often will come to the district with their member of Congress, especially in an election year. So, asking them, when's the next time you'll be in the district? Perhaps we can set up a time for me to show you why we think this is important, that I can show you why we need safety funds because of these areas in our city, or I can show you why we need new money for trails because look at this trail that we started but need to finish. Meeting with a staffer in the district and taking them to an event, it's a lot less involved than taking the member, and so sometimes that's a good way to start. You get to know them, show them what you're talking about, and that will also help you get to the member in the future. And then, of course, remember to share your experience here or your voting record with a fellow constituent. Now, if your member always votes the right way, it's another thing you can do that would be really helpful to them and will make them know that you care, is sharing that voting record, writing an article, sharing that with your members, fellow constituents. Hey, this is why our member of Congress is so great. They will pay attention to that, they will note that, and they will remember you. Okay. Getting into the follow-up. It's my plea every year to please follow up with me and with the office. With the office, you want to get an answer or you want to know the next steps. When can I follow up with you? Have you had a chance to talk to the boss about this? Where are they on this? Is there other information I can get to you that would help you make up your mind or would help the boss make up their mind? Longer term, we really want to build that relationship, and we want you to become a source for them when they're looking at bills, when they're thinking about transportation. So, talking with them regularly, keeping in touch with the staffer, clarifying any questions you have about their position. If they ask questions, you can answer any questions they had. Just becoming a reliable source is really important. When we talk about getting it on the record, think about ways that if you have a newsletter that your advocacy organization puts out or a blog, here's some ideas on what you can write. If they're supportive, we thank her so much, that was great. They're non-committal, putting something out in public that you're looking for an answer from them is helpful. Or if they disagree, it's also a sign to them that, hey, this is important, we need to figure out how we're going to work around this issue. Another way to say a lot of those things I just said, stay in contact, become a resource. I'd say once a month is probably enough. If things are happening faster than that, you might want to do twice a month. Keep them abreast on local progress. If new infrastructure opens, if there's a state or local policy win, you have an event, let them know, invite them to those events. If you see an action alert from the league or another organization, don't just click that email, but write them a personal email about why it matters. Of course, come back to the summit. And once again, looking at the Congressional Management Foundation data, this is asking staffers how important are the following for understanding constituent views and opinions. For them, it's going to those events. So if you can get them to that event, you're going to have an oversized influence. A personal message from them. Look at the difference. The personal message, 70% says it's very important, with a full 97% saying very or somewhat. If you go down to identical form communications from constituents, only 4% say that's very important. Now, we still do that because 56% say it's somewhat important, or important. So like we still get that volume in an office where they say, hey, this is something we need to consider because we're getting all these emails on it. But it's not nearly as effective as that 1, 2, 3 personal emails, especially when it's someone that they know. Okay. And then the last thing I want to let you know, and why I really, really want feedback, is that I've been working with a graduate student, also a bicycle advocate, using some statistics and some data to try to figure out how we can rate the bicycle friendliness of members of Congress. What he looked at was 3 scores. Basically, first, how bicycle friendly is that member of Congress based on the actions that they've taken. We used Earl Blumenauer as the standard for perfect on bike issues and then rated people against that. The second one he looked at was how bicycle friendly is the district. How dense is it? What is its walk score? How many Bicycle Friendly America awards does it have? And then based on those 2 ratings came up with a potential rating. So, you know, hey, here's a member that lives in an area where there's, you know, good commute rates, there's good density, there's good walk score, but they're not really taking a lot of congressional actions. That tells us that's someone that has a lot of potential to improve their bicycle friendliness. Or reverse, in some cases, we have people who their district does not seem that bike friendly, but they're doing a bunch of congressional action, so we know that there's something personal in their world that makes them support biking. And that information will help us know which offices to target, know which ones should have the biggest bang for your buck kind of thing. So when you come, do your visits, we're going to ask for your lobby visit report, and I will ask you to rate your representative in terms of bicycle friendliness and to rate your district, so that it's going to kind of be a beta test to truth test what we've done and see if that makes sense. I haven't quite figured out those questions yet, but hopefully we'll have more data to share with you when you get to the summit. So, and then lastly, we'll talk more about the bills that we're looking for or that we'll be talking about next Monday. We can also talk about some of those other bills that are out there. There's actually, I think, 10 bills introduced now on biking and walking. We're trying to pick the ones that we feel have the biggest bang for the buck overall and a good chance of passing. So I'm going to go back to some questions. I have a question on, can we schedule an in-person meeting at a later date with the representative during the meeting with staff? They would prefer to be contacted via email because the staff person doesn't schedule for the member. The people you're meeting with are policy experts. They're not, and most members of Congress have a scheduler in the office. Even if that scheduler is there, they're probably going to ask you to email. But you can try, you can ask the scheduler when you're there. Again, I want to point to Galen's comment that you can also meet with them when they're home in the district, and I can share that calendar with you. And that's one thing you can ask the staffer too, is when are you going to be in district? Maybe we can set up a meeting where you can get both the policy expert and the member of Congress together in the district, and that would be great. Okay. So I did get a question on North Carolina needing to update the new districting. We're working on that. We'll have that. The same is true for Pennsylvania. All right. Any other questions? So again, as between now and the summit, if you come up with questions, remember we will have that session where we'll have some professional lobbyists, we'll have some congressional staff there to help and answer questions. We can answer some of those questions before we get to the meetings. Also, if you have, trying to get to the, so also if you have questions, my email is here, caron@bikeleague.org, and I can answer any questions via email as well. Okay. So I got a question about how are we to handle issues if they will not be in the office, meaning I think if they're retiring or they don't get reelected, something like that. Both the House and the Senate right now are working on parts of the transportation bill, so it's still worth meeting with those members who are going to be here for the next 10 months. There's going to be a real push to get the transportation bill done this year, because even if so usually they don't finish the bill on time, and they do what are called short-term extensions. And so they say, we'll do it in 3 months, we'll do it in 6 months, and they keep pushing that off. The Highway Trust Fund balance is going to hit 0 probably this calendar year, maybe early next year. So they don't have a lot of time. So if they extend it, they're still going to have to either raise taxes or cut funding. And so if they're going to have to make a vote to do that, they only want to do it once, and they want to get the policy done at the same time. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on them this year to get that bill done. Okay. All right, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for joining me. I will send out this recording and some of the handouts and information we were just talking about tomorrow. And I look forward to joining you again next week to talk about the bills. Thank you.